I'm going to be speaking this evening about the influence of Jewish thought on post-war American abstraction and beyond. I'd like to thank Professors Douglas Rosenberg and Terrell Dobbs for the opportunity to present, and the 92nd Street Y for hosting. And I'd also like to say that this presentation was originally a book that was published in 1993 by Ulisse Calypso, a publishing house in Naples, directed by Pino and Maggi Napolitano, with an introduction by Enrico Pedrini. It's interesting to note how many significant protagonists of the abstract expressionist movement were of Jewish descent. Artists like Barnett Newman, Morris Louis, Mark Rothko, Philip Guston, Helen Frankenthaler, and many others were Jews, as were critics like Clement Greenberg, Harold Rosenberg, Maya Shapiro, and Robert Rosenblum. In the wake of the Holocaust and with the advent of a Jewish state in Palestine, it was natural that artists begin to reflect on their background and particular Jewish identity. Sorry, any better?
Closer.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to speak about three currents, particularly in Jewish thought. Halcha, the way, the more traditional law-based approach, Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah, and if we have time, I'll offer a brief coda on the Jewish folk tradition. Halcha comes from the Exodus. When Moses ascended Mount Sinai to receive the tablets of the law, he was gone for 40 days and 40 nights, during which time the Israelites became restless and demanded that Aaron provide them with a god to help deliver them from the desert. Aaron obliged, melted down ornaments and earrings of the Israelites to fashion a golden calf. And the Israelites were worshiping this calf when Moses descended from Sinai, in his anger destroying the tablets of the law. And as a result, the second commandment of the Decalogue, prohibiting the creation of graven images, has conditioned the nature of Jewish art making from biblical times through much of the 19th century. Limiting it largely to symbolic or decorative work. Kabbalah might seem like an obscure influence on artists of that generation, but in fact they had a distinguished champion in the person of Gershom Scholem, a German historian born in Berlin, moved to Palestine before the Second World War, ultimately became the first professor of Jewish mysticism at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. But he was a very prolific writer, and some of his books were found in the library of Barnett Newman, particularly on his death. Scholem wrote about Isaac Luria, an important Kabbalist of the 16th century. Here's an image of Luria and his gravesite, which is a pilgrimage site in Safed in northwest Israel today. Luria identified three phases of creation, the first being tzimtzum, or contraction, the second, shavirat ha-kelim, the breaking of the vessels, and finally, tikkun, or correction. Tzimtzum, according to Luria, at the beginning of time, or the beginning of creation, God was manifested as the Ein Sof Or this absolute essence, an all-encompassing light. And in order to create space for creation, it contracted into, in a process known as Tzimtzum, to create a primordial space. And you could think of it as akin to throwing a pebble into still water, and the concentric rings that form are analogous to the 10 sephirot, or divine emanations. Here they are in a different formation. They are from top to bottom, the highest being Keter, or crown, and the lowest Malchut, or kingdom. There are different phases in the creation according to this worldview, and the light forms the contours of a first man, Adam Kadmon, this primordial man, and then hardens into vessels at different points on his body, reflecting the Sephirot. Then from the forehead of Adam Kadmon pours light into these vessels, and some of the lower Sephirot, the vessels, are unable to contain this luminosity, and they shatter, sending sparks into the void. It's something like a champagne tree at a wedding. It's also described with the metaphor of a blacksmith. A blacksmith is creating something at his anvil, but the byproduct of that creation is sparks. This is a text from a Kabbalistic text from Safed, and you'll notice in the upper left-hand corner there's a text in the block of text in the form of a vessel. And finally, tikkun. Tikkun is this restoration or correction of that initial catastrophe, or the breaking of vessels. The idea is to return light to its source, return the sparks of light to Adam Kadmon, and thus bring about the Messianic Age, or Golden Age. So in terms of artists, probably the front and center in terms of artists who were profoundly influenced by Jewish thought, and particularly Jewish mysticism, was Barnett Newman. He was born in New York City to an Orthodox family, studied philosophy at City College, and he was one of the most conceptual of the abstract expressionists. What you're looking at is Monument 1. It's a painting of 1948 in the Modern. It was his first zip painting, and the zips are these vertical marks that separate the canvas, and can certainly be thought of as akin to this separation of darkness from light, or the heavens from the earth, man from woman, and also like the ray or kav in Jewish mysticism. One-ment can refer to monotheism, or at one-ment, like atonement, alluding to Yom Kippur, which is the most sacred high holiday, which is also atonement for having worshipped the golden calf. Abraham of 1949, this is his first all-black painting, and is derived from both the name of his father, who had recently passed away, and Abraham the patriarch.
We see something white. It's just the black in the middle?
Yeah, there's actually, it's black on black. There's a zip down the center of it.
Yeah, so the steps of the way is done.
So the white is on the wall. What is the wall? Is the screen not the wall?
This is Black Fire, another painting. This one, the title's derived from the Kabbalistic idea of black and white fire, the black being the ink on the Torah scroll, and the white being the parchment of the scroll. This is Adam, a painting of 1951. And I want to point out that the position of the zips was always determined carefully by Newman, who was very interested in numerology. And you're mostly aware that the letters of the Hebrew alphabet all correspond to numbers. It was known as gematria in antiquity. And he would often determine the placement of his zip through calculations, along with the number of paintings that he would exhibit in an exhibition. He liked for the numbers to be auspicious. This is Tzim Tzum, a sculpture from 1974, derived from this first contraction of the creation in Jewish mysticism.
Where is that, if I may ask?
To be certain, I'm not sure. It's actually based on a model that he made in 1963 of a synagogue windows. So it seems the sculpture is actually derived from an earlier model that he created for a synagogue window. This is Broken Obelisk, a wonderful sculpture by Newman, which again refers to the ray or kav of Jewish mysticism, broken like the imperfect creation. Helen Frankenthaler also appertained to this group, a bit younger. She came from a very assimilated Jewish family in New York City, grew up on the Upper East Side. Her father was a Supreme Court justice in New York State, studied at the Art Students League in Bennington College, and she was included in Clement Greenberg's post-painterly abstraction exhibition in 1964 at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. This painting is Eden, a painting of 1956. It began with the placement of the number 100, according to Frankenthaler, and then the figuration and the colors followed from there. One thing that she created, an invention of Frankenthaler's that's very significant, is this soak stain approach. She was very taken with the work of Jackson Pollock, and she would often paint with the canvas laid out on the ground in front of her. But she would work with unprimed canvas, so she would use highly thin color and then apply it to the canvas in such a way that the paint mingled with the fabric, which certainly gives a very different effect coloristically, but also contains the seed of its own destruction, because the oil causes canvas to rot or to badly discolor. So again, there's this notion of darkness and light, creation and destruction being commingled in the work. This is Jacob's Ladder, a painting of 1957. A Seascape with Dunes, 1962. And finally, and finally the Bay of 1963. Morris Lewis, née Louis Bernstein, was from Baltimore, Maryland, studied at the Maryland College of Art, and worked for the WPA in New York City during the 1930s. And his work was strongly influenced by Frankenthaler. He, along with Kenneth Nolan, visited her studio in New York City and was very taken with the soak stain approach to painting, which he used strongly in his own work. The titles are often derived from Jewish themes. This is Aleph of 1960, Aleph being the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and often associated with the creation. This is Tet of 1958, another letter. This is Dalet Tzaddik of 1958, or the Holy Dalet, another letter. And finally, Beth Kuf, 1958, the house of the Kuf, or the letter Kuf. Mark Rothko. Mark Rothko, born Marcus Yakovlevich Rothkovich in Vinsk, Latvia, emigrated to Portland, Oregon, where he was a yeshiva student. And after a 2-year stint at Yale University, he moved to New York City. He did different things to earn a living at that time, but one of his gigs was to draw maps for Rabbi Lewis Brown's book, The Graphic Bible, in 1928. This painting is violet, black, orange, yellow on white, and red of 1949. And one thing that fascinates me about the composition of Rothko's work is the way that these blocks of color correspond, interestingly, to the blocks of Hebrew text that you might find in a manuscript or printed book. This is gray, orange on maroon, number 8, 1960. And number 10 of 1952. And of course, the Jewish people have had more than their share of troubles over the course of their long history. This is the destruction of the temple in 70 ACE, and the shadow from the menorah. Philip Guston, born Philip Goldstein in Montreal, Canada, also studied at Otis Art Institute in California, but I view him as a transitional figure in the arts. His early work was firmly rooted in abstract expressionism. This piece is to BWT of 1952. But in his later work, he focused more on depictive figuration like this book and an abstracted language of 1969. This is Red Sea, the swell blue light of 1975, certainly a theme of the Exodus and passage to freedom and the trials encountered along that passage. And this is City Limits of 1969, and you'll see that he really was engaging with social issues of the time. I mean, at the height of the race riots and civil rights movement, and also with a sense of dark humor, these kind of Klansman-like cartoons driving around urban blight, one of them smoking a cigarette. But I think there's a real, he was starting to engage through a kind of tragic irony with these later paintings. And I'm a great fan of the Golem story. There are many Golem stories, the Golem of Prague being the most famous. These are stills from the famous Paul Wegener silent movie of 1920. The story is that in medieval Prague, a Rabbi Lowe fashioned an anthropomorphic being out of clay and inscribed on his forehead the Hebrew word emet. To deactivate the golem, he could simply erase the aleph, the first character, to make it met, so from truth to death. This is Street Golem, a digital collage of my own. But the idea was that this golem was created to protect the people of Prague from expulsion or annihilation. So it's intriguing to me that a certain body of figurative sculpture may be derived from this unorthodox story. This is George Siegel, pop artist, born in New York City, studied Cooper Union. The gay liberation movement and monument in Christopher Park. Abraham's Farewell to Ishmael of 1987. This is Jonathan Borovsky, born in Boston, studied at Yale. Hammering Man, a work of 1979 in Frankfurt. It's kinetic. The arm of the being moves, actually hammers, moves up and down. Borovsky would number his ideas. This is a self-portrait with numbers, which certainly relates to the gematria of Jewish mysticism, and perhaps also alludes more darkly to the tattoos given to Jewish inmates of concentration camps. William Kentridge, born in Johannesburg, South Africa, studied at the Johannesburg Art Foundation. This is The Refusal of Time. Kentridge grew up around apartheid and definitely engaged with issues of social inequity in his work. He also invented a fascinating approach to filmmaking. He would film a drawing, the evolution of a drawing, so as an application of pigment and erasures became part of the temporal dimension of the film. And when it was projected, you had this kind of flickering, ethereal document to the artistic process. This is more Sweetly Play the Dance. A video plays across 8 screens. So I'd like to conclude with there are so many Jewish artists across disciplines that they're too numerous to mention. But perhaps the most significant Jewish concept that unites their intention is tikkun, that desire to somehow return sparks of light to their source and heal in some small measure the troubled world that we live in. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.